Could you rationalize a sacrifice? Often in movies and shows, we are shown a sacrifice as more of a fantastic thing, done for the sake of all or nothing. To be a last resort and an honorable experience, in those shows, they're built up to be a final resort, a last-ditch effort to save it all. Could you rationalize an eldritch being telling you that you must give them a sacrifice or else the world ends? Hi, it's me. Grant me all the souls in the world shall not end. Kidding, not really. Anyways, good evening, I'm Sin, and welcome to Horror and Chill, the lovely online web series where I talk about a horror-related topic and the vibes are chill. Tonight's topic? Life Eater. Life Eater is a game initially suggested by one of you lovely pieces of the hive mind here on YouTube. It was developed by Strange Scaffold and published with Frosty Pop. It's $14.99 on Steam, and what a ride it was. I was very interested in this game the moment I saw it. Something about the nature of their art style was utterly captivating. I found myself lost in its looks, and when it came to playing the game, I was even more surprised. The game has entire voice acting for its cutscenes. A fact that I was completely unaware of and thus enamored by. I tend to go into these games as blind as humanly possible, so those little things are always a fun treat. We play as a character that is meant to be nameless, but once I got far enough and squinted at his name, I resorted to believing that his name is Ralph. Ralph's job is a very simple one meant for someone who simply doesn't exist, a grim reaper upon men. He goes out every year and culls whatever soul his eldritch god Zimforth calls for him to. Which is precisely what you must do. This brings us to the main mechanic of the game. It has a unique interface that can be a lot to look at, so I'll try to break it down. Our suspected targets are on the bottom left, with their age and hair color under their name and a taskbar showing our knowledge of them. To the right of that is their schedule on the timeline. Each of these staticky little pieces holds a part of their day-to-day comings and goings, which you must reveal to better assess who your target is. Now, if you're familiar with video editing, this all looks maybe a little familiar, as it was actually modeled after that. Which could be as to why they have so much camera imagery within the game's box art and other parts of it, to allude to this specific look or why it would imply it looks like this. Of course, you can't just be sneaking around people and have them not notice, hence you have this nifty little suspicion bar up here. When you are completing your tasks to try and reveal information, unless you are disguised, you will raise suspicion. To ensure this works, you have this menu on the left under the suspicion bar. You only have so many times you can disguise yourself, and since suspicion can build up rather quickly, it helps to leave people alone to their paranoia lowers. So you can do any of these activities at the price of time to lower their suspicion, and sometimes gain your ability to conceal yourself back. I mentioned timed before, but as with many things in the game, you have a time limit. You have a set amount of hours to gather information and attack your target, lest Zimforth comes and destroys the world. I usually don't explain mechanics in detail, but I found this to be very well done. Now, before you think you can just breeze through this, I'm sure you could if you bullheaded enough, they have one minigame that tests just how much you are paying attention. It brings you to this cool mock-up diagram of the human innards. You must go through and select to remove certain pieces of the body per Zimforth's request. For things like if they have black hair, remove their left lung, otherwise remove root number 12, and so forth for each question and piece. This means you have to pay attention to certain aspects of their life, especially as you only get one chance to mess up the ritual. As the game goes on to its beginning, you meet Johnny, a young 20-year-old who's somehow learned Ralph's name. This is bad for Ralph, as no one can know him, and so he resorts to putting Johnny in a cage. Johnny and Ralph's dynamic becomes your main story throughout the entire game as you play. Johnny at first tries to escape, cursing at Ralph for his fate, and yeah, can't really blame him for that. Mind you, Ralph never makes any attempts to kill Johnny nor harm him. He simply tends to him, at first calling him a beast, treating him as some sort of less than human, but he does seem to be growing some form of attachment. Vague and unassuming at first, as you go through, you encounter different targets, and you have to learn info about their lives through those around them, and try to sort out events as they transpire. As the years pass, your interactions with Johnny change. There's a point, I believe it was year 5, in which Johnny attempts to escape with a shiv of sorts, but his legs had atrophied to the point where he can't walk anymore and he hurt himself. Maybe on where he crawled out, maybe on the shiv on accident. Either way, his injury alarms Ralph and he's desperate to fix it. In contrast, Johnny calls him a monster, an abomination. He begs not to go back in there, but Ralph doesn't give in to the pleas. But now he starts to use Johnny's name. He tries to show that he views him as a person now, as earlier in the story it's vaguely hinted at, later properly instated, that he uses this to dehumanize people to make his job more manageable. Something people often do to try and loosen their emotional ties. It's an almost bittersweet confession when he says that Johnny is a real person to him. Which then leads us to the target after him, an old man in a coma. It's concerning to consider when you know the situation between Ralph and Johnny simultaneously, but you press on. Time continues as the years pass. Ralph tries to establish the idea of them being friends after asking if it was a silly concept, which Johnny agrees is a foolish idea. As time passes, the two grow in attachment. Johnny ends up asking not to be able to hear when Ralph does his duty, and so he gets headphones. He asks not to see, and so he gets a blindfold. You are shown the two almost bonding over things, like watching shows on a phone or talking about Zimforth. Johnny even tried.
Why would a God who loves you do this to you? A God who loves me. Whoever said that Zimforth loves me?
From that, you continue to bond with Johnny. Eventually he's allowed upstairs and the two continue to bond. It's a strange thing to witness. They almost feel like friends until the reminder of what they truly are sets in, a kidnapping murderer and his kidnapped associate. As it continues, you keep up your annual call, them getting slightly more complicated as you go, going from 1 to 2 or 3 souls per year. Of course, a bond that is formed is crooked and wrong, but it is certainly a bond that has happened. Every story has a low point when everything comes clattering down upon the characters. For Ralph and Johnny, it's when Zimforth's demand upon the 10th year came. It wanted Johnny. Ralph yells he won't, he can't, he doesn't give a shit about the world, but Johnny, now knowing what happens if Ralph doesn't do it, allows it, saying he has no regrets. Ralph says he loves him, and Johnny just tells him to do it. Bringing you to the last section of the game, in which you must go through the last days of Ralph and Johnny. Then, you make a choice. The monster or the man. You can get 2 endings from this. One where Johnny lives, pondering now what he'll do, how he'd return to society. He talks about how he's wondered what he'd do, who he'd call, what he'd eat. Well, if you choose to take him, Ralph curses Zimforth, saying it now has everything, and he hopes he chokes on it. And that's the end of the game. Credits roll. That is a lot to unpack, so let's unpack it. First, touching upon Ralph saying I love you to Johnny, when I was playing this in my Discord, we did make the joke about toxic old men Yali because of Bill Ford becoming more popular as of late. I don't think that would actually be the reason for why he said that, though if it was, that would be a little funny. Seeing this as more in the story's nature and subtext, this is Ralph's humanity. Johnny finally came and burst his bubble of isolation, becoming the only person that Ralph can talk with, be a person with. That sort of friendship, while inherently demented and gnarled by its situation, is still a friendship nonetheless. To lose something so dear to him, it wouldn't be wrong of him to exclaim that he loves Johnny. To Ralph, Johnny is the only person to ever see him as a person. Zimforth doesn't care. He can't have a life. Zimforth wants someone who doesn't exist. To finally have a person to talk with, it's, in truth, all he has. Now, of course, I could prattle on about my little insights on the characters, but I think what I've said paints a good enough picture. The voice acting of this game is utterly immaculate. It's very well acted, the lines feel on point, say a stray few, and overall, I think it helps bring these characters to life. Paired with this very uncanny sort of art that resembles a comic and a sort of hazy memory, it flows very well. The music tracks also hit hard and never feel all too repetitive or uncomfortable to listen to. Would I recommend this game? I'd say yeah. It's not anything super intense, but it's still unsettling and a treat to experience. For only being $15, I got about 3 hours of gameplay from it. I felt very satisfied with it once I gave it a proper shot, and I want to thank the lovely part of the hive mind that suggested this game. I'm Sin. Remember to take care of yourself, drink water, and good night.